talk about Marx a little bit. In many ways, I feel that much of our reflection on Marx is held back by Cold War propaganda on both sides, actually on both sides. So in many ways, I think it's useful to go back. Let's start in a place where I think Marx himself would have begun. Let's start with feudalism. So we have the Middle Ages, and specifically we have the feudal arrangement. Now, in many ways, the feudal society is characterized by forced submission, forced or coerced, violent submission. You have the lords who legally own the serfs, and the serfs are supposed to work for the lords. And in many ways, the regime of the Middle Ages is based on double violence, the physical violence and the symbolic violence. The physical violence is basically the threat of the army. Like if the peasants do not work for the lord, the army will come and make them work. The lord's army will come and make them work. So this is the army. Coercive apparatus, as later Marxist philosophers would put this. So this would be the repressive state apparatus. Louis Althusser calls this repressive state apparatus. But then, in addition to this, there's two kinds of violence. So physical violence and also ideological violence. And the ideological, so if this is based on the army, this is basically based on the church. And there are complicated relationships. There's a complicated relationship between church and state, obviously, in the Middle Ages. But when this works, when this arrangement works, the army and the church work for the king, work for the lords, in order to keep the population pacified. And if this is the repressive state apparatus, this Althusser calls ideological state apparatus. And again, so society is based on this double violence. So there is, again, you see, there's this deep and complicated question about what is good. How do we define the word good? And the problem is, it's hard to know exactly how to define the word good. You see, the lords are going to say, it is good that the serfs submit. And the priests are going to say, it's not only good that the serfs submit, it is God's will. It is God's will that the serfs work for the lords, right? So, but is it good? Some people say it's good, but does it make it good? Just because somebody said it, right? So we want some kind of impersonal, objective standard. This seems to be subjective, right? And immediately, when you ask this question, you could ask this question about our present contemporary situation. Your culture, television, media tells you what is good. But is it really good? Or could it be that what is promoted as good is simply serving the interests of some ruling group, however you define that, right? That's always a danger. That's always kind of a problem, I feel. So, so this is our feudal arrangement, right? And in this feudal arrangement, what we have is again this double violence. The ideological violence and physical violence, right? So if we want to find some objective standard of good, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And it seems that simple solutions don't work. You could say, oh, let's ask God. Ask God, you give an answer. God tells you, be a serf and work. That's not a good answer. God doesn't come and talk to us. That's a problem. You could say, well, let's try to do a rational calculation. Let's ask university professors. Well, actually, university professors at this time, universities existed in the Middle Ages, and the university professors are going to say, they're in on the game. They're also going to say, yes, there's natural submission. Aristotle very famously says that some people are just by nature slaves. They are born to be slaves. There's natural hierarchy in the world. Some people are born to be slaves, and they should just be slaves. Right? So, in many ways, modern political philosophy begins with the idea of the contract, begins with the idea of the social contract. That actually, it's not some people from above who tells you what is good. No, we actually should get together. People get together, and people have something like a free and equal discussion. Free and equal discussion. And we decide, together we decide what is good. We deliberate. Well, you say, people begin by saying, I want this and this and this and this and this. Like you make a list of the things you want, right? And you maybe make a hierarchy of the things you want. You say, these things are more important, these things are less important. What do you want? Let's discuss. Right? We put all this on the table, and we decide what is the best way to arrange so that I get what I want at the same time you get what you want. Again, this very important idea of reciprocity, взаимность. You could say fairness, and you could ask, why do we care about fairness? Why do we care about fairness at all? But here's the answer. The answer is on the board. Because if you do not care about fairness, if you do not make the arrangement fair, if the contract is not fair, then it means that some people will have to be cheated. Some people will have to be taken advantage of if the rules are unfair. If you do not have a free and equal discussion, but let's say you have an unequal discussion. Some people can participate, other people cannot participate. Well, the people whom you do not allow to participate, you will have to do violence to them. You will have to make them submit through force, and that's costly and difficult, and people will always have a temptation to rebel. But also you will have to lie to them, in addition to supplement the physical violence. And the idea is that this is not a stable arrangement. This is not a stable arrangement. Now the big question is, could it be a stable arrangement? In some sense, this is the nightmare of modern political philosophy. Could you have some perfect, sort of this anti-utopia, some sort of a police state, which is at the same time super efficient at keeping people under control? It's kind of undemocratic and efficient, right? Because on this picture, the idea is that if you're going to be less than democratic, you're going to be less than efficient, right? The idea on this picture is that you have to choose between freedom and efficiency. To the extent that you have to force the peasants to obey, they will be less efficient workers. We talked about this last time, how after the Crimean War, the Russian emperor realizes that serf armies do not fight as well as free armies, right? So you have to choose between efficiency or obedience. And if you're going to have to make people more efficient, you're going to have to make them freer at the same time. But this is always a question. This is a specter that's haunting us. Again, in 2021, we're still not sure. Maybe this is a possibility. Maybe this is the future of humanity. Some kind of horrible dictatorial anti-utopia in which people will be forced to obey, but the situation is going to be so efficient so that you don't have to choose. But in classical political philosophy, this is the rules of the game. And again, I actually teach a course in I teach a course in political philosophy. In international relations, I also teach a course in political philosophy here at ISEF. And one of your classmates, broadly speaking, second year ISEF student, asked me this question, but why is this bad? Why can this not be stable? And again, we don't know. The question is we don't know. The answer is we don't know. And history will tell. In many ways, history is the ultimate judge. This phrase I gave you last time, Die Weltgeschichte ist das Weltgericht. It's a famous statement by Schiller, maybe a summary of Hegel's philosophy, that at the end of the day, history is the world history is the world court. The world history is the world court. History will tell. Time will tell, right? But again, the idea is that if your system is based on violence, and if your system is based on lies, then it is inherently unstable. Because what's going to happen is that no system of violence, it seems to be, can be completely effective. No system of lies can be completely effective. And what's going to happen, you're going to have slow erosion, drop after drop after drop. These are going to be small drops, but there will be drops. So people will feel, maybe if they will not be able to explain this in detail, but peasants will feel that the lords do not have an authority, or legitimate authority over them, that this is based on coercion. So there will be incentive to cheat. There will be incentive to give bribes and to accept bribes. There will be incentive to break the law, to steal, to murder. And at the end of the day, if the system is based on violence, then, as you know, in the Middle Ages, from time to time, the peasants realize that it's based on violence. There's a peasant uprising, there's a peasant rebellion, and the feudal lords, if they cannot escape, they hang on trees. Their blood is spilled in return. And so even, one of the most important political philosophers of all times, Thomas Hobbes, actually talks about this, that at the end of the day, it is in the interest of the lords, it is in the interest of the king to take care of their subjects. And again, you have precedents where kings would freely give constitutions to their people, right? So, for example, I mean, the abolition of serfdom in Russia, for example, was done, you could say, as a result of the Crimean War, as a result of the defeat of the Crimean War, but still, the abolition of serfdom was done top-down. The king, the Tsar, takes care of the people, abolishes serfdom for the sake of, I don't know, efficiency, transparency, accountability, so kind of step in the right direction, right? I don't want to say in the right direction, but step in the direction of more freedoms, something like that. Again, the idea being that, again, if you do not do that, so first of all, there are these small drops that erode the social fabric, erode, if you want, the trust in society, on the one hand. And on the other hand, this could always lead to an uprising, to a rebellion. And again, if you talk about Russia, 1917, you see, the Romanovs, they tried to go this route, but they didn't go far enough. And because of that, they died. They paid with their lives and the lives of their children. And you could say that there is a certain, how should I say, like the law of, like that the execution of the Romanovs was there inherent in their actions, right? That they brought the revolution on themselves to some extent. Now, it's a complicated story of historical causation. I don't want to oversimplify this. It's obviously very simplistic to just assign praise and blame and kind of. In real social theory, you don't just explain things by appealing to people's actions. People's actions flow from particular historical circumstances. The serfdom was not abolished because Alexander, was just a kind person, right? There were certain circumstances, and likewise, Nicholas II didn't want to give people the constitution, not because of his private character or something like that, not because of his free will, but because again, you have certain cultural dynamics which are complicated. But actually, when we'll get to Marx, this is going to be already in Hegel. This is a very important point of their political philosophies, is that it's not men who make history, but history makes men. Individuals are products of their unique culture. And again, like in ancient Greece, people thought that slavery was natural and fine, and it's like we shouldn't abolish slavery. Today we don't think that, right? But in many ways, again, the idea is that we are products of our culture, and Aristotle could not step outside the limits of his culture. And in many ways, probably future generations will look at us and find some of our views just as outrageous as we find, let's say, the view of Aristotle. Possibly, we don't know for sure, but that's always a possibility. So that's like the basic idea. And again, you have this, in many ways. So again, what is good? People get together, decide free and equal discussion. And this is the social contract. So this is the Middle Ages, this is the feudal world. And this is the kind of step number 2, which is the social contract, right? And for many political philosophers, that's just it. This is you have these 2 steps, and this is maybe the end of history. Because once you realize this, once you decide on the best rules for everyone, there's nothing else to do. We'll talk. Our last class in this course is going to be about Francis Fukuyama. Francis Fukuyama says exactly this. He says free elections plus free market, so free politics, free economics. Fukuyama is going to say this is the end of history. Obviously, clocks keep ticking, and there are newspapers printed every day, but we have solved the riddle of history in the sense that like political evolution of human societies is over, right? And for some philosophers, it's true. Again, you can talk about, maybe, if you want, with respect to all this, the French Revolution. The French Revolution as the pivotal moment in the history of humanity. And in many ways, for philosophers like Hegel, the French Revolution itself is not the end of history, but the French Revolution sets in motion the last stage of the end of history. Basically, the French Revolution introduces the constitutional state, the state based on constitutions. In German, you would say the Rechtsstaat. So again, this in the works of Hegel, this gives us the Rechtsstaat. In Russian, this would be правовое государство, Rechtsstaat. So in English, you would say something like constitutional state of laws. And once you get this for Hegel, not the French Revolution, but sort of in the aftermath of the French Revolution, and Hegel, I think, hopes or imagines that the first country to adopt a constitution like this is going to be Germany, Prussia. It didn't actually happen exactly that way in history, but this was Hegel's prediction. And the idea that this would be the end of history. And again, is this Fukuyama? This is similar to Fukuyama. And when we talk about Fukuyama is actually is a card-carrying Hegelian. Fukuyama, who's still alive now, he's a very important American philosopher today, in the world today. And he says this is the end of history. But this is where we get to Marx. I hope so far we're clear. I hope so far we're good. This is where we get to Marx. Marx says, no, this is actually not enough. This is not enough. Because in addition to the French Revolution, there's also the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution. And when you talk about the Industrial Revolution, there is the original promise of the Industrial Revolution. So in people like John Locke and in people like Adam Smith, there is a certain explanation of what the Industrial Revolution does, or capitalism, broadly speaking, if you want. And what John Locke and Adam Smith do is they say that, yes, the Industrial Revolution introduces division of labor, and it introduces inequality. It increases inequality. It's going to be a different kind of inequality. In the Middle Ages, you have inequality between lords and serfs. Here, we have equal starting positions, but people who are, let's say, more productive in society can get more money, and so you will get equality at the start, but inequality at the finish. But, very importantly, for both John Locke and Adam Smith, this is still social contract. This is still social contract. So what is very important for both Locke and Smith is they say, capitalism is justified. Capitalism is justified because it benefits the poorest members of society. Benefits the poorest. Benefits the poorest. So I'm not sure. Let's start with Smith, and then we'll go back to Locke, who wrote before Smith. Adam Smith says, in a well-ordered society, which is, you have to understand, there's this very important question. In a well-ordered society, what is a well-ordered society? Does our society count as a well-ordered society? It's not necessarily a very clear question, a very clear statement, right? So, but Smith says, in a well-ordered society, he says, the division of labor produces what he calls universal opulence, wealth for all. This is a summary of the wealth of nations in one sentence. Summary of all, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, the summary of wealth of nations in one sentence. In a well-ordered society, free market and division of labor produce wealth for all, including for the poorest members of society. And Adam Smith talks about how, yes, there's inequality, and let's say the peasant, the average European peasant is poorer than the European prince, but, he says, the peasant is much richer than, as he says, a king, an African king, the master, the absolute master of lives of 10,000 naked savages. If you ever want to look this quote up, just Google Adam Smith, 10,000 naked savages. You will find this quote. Again, he says, in a the moral justification of capitalism is that even the poorest people in capitalism are better off than kings in Africa, like in this state of nature, if you want. State of nature without capitalism. They're all equal, but they're equally poor. Right? But what capitalism does, it makes us unequal, but the poor benefit. So it's like if you were to try to draw this as a graph, it's like in the state of nature, we're all approximately equal, and yes, the king has slightly more. If this is wealth, and this is individuals. So this is individuals in Africa, according to Adam Smith. But in capitalism, we are unequal, but the poorest member of society is still richer than the African king, right? I hope this graph is clear. It's not a difficult idea to understand. And John Locke, writing several generations before Adam Smith, says exactly the same thing. And John Locke, he talks about how a day laborer in England is richer than a king in the Americas. So A stands for Africa or America, right? And when you think about what day laborer means, I think that the meaning of the word day laborer is somebody who wakes up in the morning, they do not have enough food for today, so they have to go and work and earn their money, earn their bread today. So through my work today, I will earn enough money to survive. And still, I am better off than a king in the Americas, according to John Locke. This is the original justification. That everybody benefits, if you want this phrase, trickle down, that yes, the rich get richer, but the poor also get richer because the wealth trickles down from top to bottom. And this is exactly where Marx comes in. And Marx is going to say, there is a contradiction between the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. There is a contradiction between the promise of the French Revolution and the reality of the Industrial Revolution. The promise is, in Adam Smith and John Locke, is that rich get richer and poor get richer. But Marx says what actually happens if you look outside the window is very clearly not this, in any shape, matter, or form. What actually happens is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You get polarization. Rich get richer and poor get poorer. Polarization. And notice that because you get polarization, you in some sense go back to this feudal arrangement. You have masses of terribly poor people, and in order to keep them poor and in order to keep them working, the state has to deploy physical violence through police and ideological violence. Today we would say not the church anymore, but some sort of market ideology. The kinds of things that you study in your economics courses, that competition is always favors efficiency, etc., etc. And again, it's an interesting question. In many ways, it's an empirical question. When Marx is writing in the 19th century, and this is another challenge of trying to understand Marx, the world has changed. I think the world has changed since Marx's time, but it also stayed the same. It's changed, but it's also stayed the same. It's changed because in the 19th century in Britain, you had horrible working conditions. So the vast majority of people worked 7 days a week with no weekend, no days off. You work 7 days a week, and the working day was 14, 15, 16 hours a day. There's absolutely no social welfare, no unemployment benefits, no kind of labor protection, right? And the working conditions were extremely horrifying, right? You had this thick smog, black smoke over the cities, such that children did not get enough vitamin D, and so they got brittle bone disease. Bones would become brittle, just break, right? This is a terribly inhuman condition. And to say that those people with brittle bone disease are healthier and happier than the African kings was a horrible lie. In fact, anthropologists, and there's a bit of a controversy in the question, but anthropologists today tell me that actually if you look at bones of hunter-gatherers, the bones of hunter-gatherers are actually much healthier than bones of feudal agriculturals. That actually history of the world is not the history of progress. This is what anthropologists tell me, if we can believe them. This is also what Marx tells us, right? That actually there is no progress in history, there's regress. We were free and happy as hunter-gatherers, and then it was downhill. Yes, the rich got richer, but for the vast majority of people, so for some, maybe life was better, but for the vast majority of people, life got worse. And notice, if you have this tremendous mass of poor people who have absolutely no unemployment benefits and no protection, democracy cannot work. Democracy cannot work because these people have no time. They don't have any education. They don't have any spare time to engage in politics. They cannot organize political parties. They cannot supervise and observe the political process. So if you get politicians who are corrupt, these people who are overworked and on the verge of starvation, they cannot exercise effective check. So what happens is because of the Industrial Revolution, the results of the French Revolution are reverted, and we in some sense go back to feudalism. And now we have new aristocracy. This used to be aristocracy of birth. Now we get aristocracy of wealth. And I said that the world, since Marx's time, the world has changed, but the world has also stayed the same. It has changed because in Britain, in Netherlands, in Denmark, children don't get brittle bone disease. But there are 8 billion people on planet Earth. And I would say that ballpark rough estimate is that approximately for the 7 billion people, Marx is still right. For the 1 billion people in the advanced countries, Marx is, doesn't apply in a straightforward fashion anymore, although it's a complicated question. How exactly does our politics work? I mean, I don't want to turn this into political commentary on current events, but even in terms of political commentary on current events, some people will say that even among the so-called golden billion, even among the so-called first world countries, still you can see the Industrial Revolution subverting the results of the French Revolution. Big money in politics, capitalism, subverting political procedure. Again, talk of corrupt politicians. Talk of politicians who rule not in the interest, even in developed countries, even in the first world countries, who rule not in the interest of the people, but who rule in the interest of tiny minority of super rich. Kind of right? But with the developed countries, it's a question, right? We do not know. We're not sure. But very clearly, I think for at least 7 billion people who live in India, people who live in China, people who live in Africa, the answer is no, their life is not good. And you could say, well, but it's a problem of countries, other countries, like the countries should modernize. But you have to understand that, and this is what Marx is saying, you cannot just look at politics, you have to also look at economics. Because the reason why people in China, in India, and in Africa are poor is because of the way capitalism works. And this is another very important contention of Marx. Marx says that rich get richer, poor get poorer. This is not an accident. This is a systematic fallout. This is a systematic thing that free market produces. Basically, let's try to draw this picture. You have competition. Competition leads to progress. So competition leads to progress. And again, Marx is very adamant. He's going to say, you see, the kings are not evil people. The bourgeoisie are not evil people. What happens is you have coercive laws of competition in the market, coercive laws of market competition. People, the capitalists, are forced to innovate because of competition. You innovate, and you have technological progress, and technological progress means you need less labor. You need less labor. So capitalism, by itself, produces what Marx calls the reserve army of the unemployed. The reserve army of the unemployed. I mean, there's more technology, there's more food. Food is cheap. It's more readily available. Population begins to grow. More unemployed people. More competition in the labor market. But also, at the same time, technology becomes more productive. You need fewer people to do the same job. And people lose jobs because of this structural unemployment. Unemployment due to technological change. And this kind of increases into the future. So on the one hand, capitalism gives you unemployment for free, and because of unemployment, the wage is going to go down. There's higher labor supply, there's lower, therefore the wage is lower. Up until Marx is going to say that the wage will tend towards subsistence wage, where the worker doesn't care, is indifferent between dying of starvation or working for the minimum wage. This is going to be it's not going to be exactly that, but the wage is going to be driven down to that point as a tendency, right? But on the other hand, it is very much in the interest of the capitalist. It is very, very much in the interest now of the ruling class to maintain this situation. Because if people are poor, first of all, they work for cheap dirt wages, so it's possible to exploit them. And secondly, if people are dirt poor, they cannot organize and they cannot take you down. You have a machine gun, and what they have is just a poor mass of people. When one machine gun will win against the poor mass of people. So again, on the one hand, this begins as a structural fallout of the way that capitalism works, but then it is also in the interest of the ruling class, and so the system will be perpetuated into the future. And basically what Marx is saying is that, in some sense, we go back to this picture, and you have to ask, is this a good picture? Is this a sustainable picture? And this is the danger of this, I think, of this anti-utopia in the 21st century, right? That we're going to go back to some form of this medieval regime. Well, you could also say that, it's like if you ask yourself, why humanity hasn't solved climate change yet? Why haven't we solved climate change? Because we lack the means? No way. It's technologically, it's not a difficult thing to solve the climate change. But what we have is, I need to write this somewhere, coercive laws of competition in the market. Coercive laws of competition in the market. Marx would say that we, in 2020, humanity, remember, we had this promise of freedom, this promise of Rechtsstaat in Hegel, but Marx is going to say, are we free in 2020 as a humanity, as human species? And Marx is going to say, no, we're not free. We know that we are destroying the planet. We know that we will destroy the future for our children, but we cannot get together and do the right thing because we are slaves to the market. It's not that people make history. It is that the market decides for us what we're going to do. So in many ways, when Marx talks about emancipation, he talks about political emancipation. He talks about political emancipation of humanity. We get together and we do what we think is right. We invest not in junk stocks on the Wall Street, but we invest in healthcare or solving, the next pandemic which may be coming, or let's say the meteorites, right? Humanity probably doesn't spend nearly enough money looking out for the next meteor that might hit the Earth and destroy us, right? Is this a rational choice on our part? Have we sat down and decided in this free and equal discussion, when we do this list of priority hierarchy of values, did we say like survival of humanity? Very low. We don't care about that. We care about market efficiency, right? Marx says we haven't done this. This was not our free choice. This is a structure which was imposed on us, the same way that feudal structure was imposed on peasants in the Middle Ages. In many ways, this is the ultimate upshot of Marx's analysis, to see the feudal side of capitalism, to see capitalism as a continuation of feudalism by other means, to see capitalism, if you want, as feudalism on steroids, right? And again, so first of all, this there's this problem, is this potential anti-utopia, but also this, we should add another problem to the list, because if we are ruled by coercive laws of competition in the market, maybe humanity can destroy itself. Right? And there's a very famous Marxist slogan which goes, socialism or barbarism, socialism or barbarism. Again, imagine us not being able to solve the problem of nuclear proliferation or to solve the problem of climate change, and Earth becomes uninhabitable, and we devolve back into barbarism, right? Socialism or barbarism in this very concrete sense, right? And Marx himself was very optimistic. Marx himself was extremely optimistic because he thought that because our present state of affairs is clearly based on coercion and exploitation, on violence. Again, well, I'm not talking about what is good, because who knows what is good? Goodness is a subjective word. As Thomas Hobbes says, whatever people like, they call good. Whatever people don't like, they call evil. So I like chocolate ice cream, you like vanilla ice cream. We'll never agree on what is good. Let's talk about what is objective. Marx says, objectively, whether you think it's good or not, our present state of affairs, our present political structure, world structure, because again, capitalism is global. Our society in 2021 is global. People catch a disease in one country, they spread it to another country. We are in this together. We pollute the environment together. So, if the proper level of analysis is humanity as a whole, you cannot just say, "Oh, poverty in Africa is not our problem." It is our problem. It is partly because if you allow capitalists in your country to exploit people in Africa, then they bring capital back, they bring money back from Africa, and they can buy elections at home. So it is your problem. It is our, Marx says there's a reason why British workers should care about the welfare of Irish workers. Or you would say in today's terms, there's a reason why Israeli workers should care about the welfare of Palestinian workers. There's a reason why, let's say, Dutch workers should care about the welfare of African workers, because we're in this together. The labor market is the same for everyone. The reserve army of unemployed in Africa drives the wages down in Russia. So we are connected. We are in this together. Global problems require global solutions, right? And again, Marx was optimistic because he said, our global world order is clearly based on coercion and violence, and this is not sustainable into the future. Because if you have to rely on coercion and violence, little by little, these drops, there's incentive to cheat, there's incentive to bribe, there's incentive to break the law, there's incentive to steal, there's incentive to rebel, there's incentive to revolt, there's incentive to destroy. And maybe also there is lack of incentive to pursue collective goals. Because if you say, okay, there's global warming and humanity will destroy itself, but it is you, China, who have to cut down emissions, but we, America, we're not going to cut down emissions. So instead of getting together, working together for the future of our children, let's fight and destroy the world, destroy the planet. You see, that's the danger, that's the issue. And again, Marx was, we don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows. Marx was optimistic because he thought, again, communist revolution for Marx, especially for young Marx in 1848, when he writes Communist Manifesto, he thinks that communist revolution, because of inherent instability of capitalism, will be inevitable. Marx optimistically thinks that capitalism will destroy itself and communism will arrive automatically. There's obviously like a million details that we need to fill in, but later Marx in 1871, so 20 years after the 1848, right, towards the end of the 19th century, Marx became very pessimistic. Marx became very pessimistic about this. And next time, I should be wrapping this up, next time we're actually going to talk about Russia and China. And I want you to see that if you look at this picture, Russia and China, maybe revolutionaries in Russia and China had some good intentions, but if you look at the regime of Stalin in Russia, or if you look at the regime of Mao in Russia, it has absolutely nothing in common with Marx's political project. Absolutely nothing in common with Marx. Marx had this vision of liberation for entire humanity. Instead, in Russia and China, you just have feudalism by other means. Instead of the bourgeoisie exploiting the proletariat, in Russia and China, you have the Politburo. You have the state bureaucracy exploiting the workers. Basically, for Marx, if Marx was alive and he saw Russia and China, he'd say, this is not communism. This has nothing to do with communism. This is state capitalism. And this is one of the reasons that Marx is such a misunderstood philosopher. Okay, so maybe last word. So last word I want to say that I find Marx extremely stimulating and deeply relevant for us in the 21st century. Of course, the big question is, I think that Marx is very valuable as a critic of capitalism, as a person who asks the question, as a person who points out the problem. Now, in terms of the solution, it's not that Marx's solution is bad. He doesn't have a solution. He doesn't write about communism. If you read 10,000 pages that Marx has written, he writes barely 3 pages about communism. Again, he hopes that it's going to come automatically by itself. So in many ways, I think that if we want to engage with Marx productively, we have to take what is valuable in Marx, that is his criticism of capitalism, and then fill in the blank, fill in the blank. And the blank is, what do we do with this? Where do we go forward? And this is partly, to some extent, what we're going to talk about next time. Okay, colleagues, I hope this was fun. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, thank you so much. Good luck on your exams, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care.